Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Avi. Thank you, Radu. Okay, maybe we shall we extend a round of applause to the director of Z32, Avi Mograbi, and Radu Jude, the Romanian director who selected this film for his carte blanche, for his retrospective here at the Broadway Cinematheque. Okay, before we were to begin, maybe I'll explain a little bit about the raison d'etre of this event. We, of course, are in the middle of a retrospective of Radu's work. And as part of this program, we've invited Radu to select some films which are of relevance and also of influential to him. So in collaboration with the Asian Film Awards Academy, today we have this craft workshop. We are going to host this craft workshop in which we invited Radu and Avi to be in conversation with each other and also with the audience to talk about, of course, not just Z32, but about films in general. And the title of this talk is Conscientious, Objectors. So I hope that Avi and Radu, you don't mind me calling you guys conscientious objectors in more ways than one. And okay, and because both Avi and Radu, your films run against the grain of the mainstream narrative in your home country about how history is to be perceived and also what social justice is. And you've attracted a lot of criticism for your work from your compatriots. So actually, we just like to have you here with us to talk a bit about how the challenges you faced in making your films, in tackling history, in tackling the past, the present, and future in the way that you did. Okay, so maybe I'll start with Radu first, because actually, Radu, you selected Z32 as one of the films in your carte blanche, and you told me is a very influential film for you because it actually but it actually inspires you in how to look at the present through filmmaking. So Radu, can you talk a little bit about, well, what Z32 means to you and why you actually selected this film for this program?
Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me this pleasure to present films that I like. I'm always, it happened to me 2 or 3 times, and I'm always more excited to present films of others, films I admire, than my own films, which I have a lot of reservations about. But for the films I admire, much less. Well, in the case of the film of Avi Mograbi, the thing is that it's not only this film. I know all the films of Avi Mograbi, and I think you can find them online, the rest if you haven't seen it. And there are 2 things, roughly, which makes me to admire his work enormously. One thing is a little bit what you said, the fact that he's a filmmaker that goes against the mainstream politics regarding the current moment in Israel, the realities of the occupation or the history of Israel. So he's a little bit, what I believe that it's important that the films to be as much as possible against the system of production themselves. But that's obvious in this film, I think. That's obvious in all his films. And this is one part of his filmmaking that I feel very close to and very inspired by and extremely in admiration. But that's only one part of the thing, because the other part is the formal aspect. I believe very strongly that if cinema has to be relevant, more than, I don't know, journalism, or in other ways, not more than journalism or literature or history books or essays, I don't know, this kind of thing has to use the form of cinema to interrogate the problems. So I think that all films of Avi have this extreme powerful formal quality. So if cinema thinks, as Godard said, then it thinks through a certain form. And all his films have a distinct form. It's very obvious in this film. It's very obvious in Between Fences. It's very obvious in a film like Avenged by One of My Two Eyes, or August, where Avi is playing different characters, because this is also another part of his, if you want, distanciation effect, a little bit of Brechtian effect, is the fact that he stages himself in the middle of his films and playing a character in an obvious way. I mean, it's Avi Mograbi, but also is playing a little bit different for sure. And this creates this kind of double direction. On one hand, the films are very, very direct and very, very powerful and strong regarding the topic. And on one hand is the distanciation that he's creating by the use of form. And for me, these two aspects are essential in different ways in my work, because I don't think I ever made a film as good as his films, but are essential as a way of thinking about cinema.
Radu, because actually Avi has been making quite a lot of films since the 1980s, when he began filmmaking with the short film Deportation, and then afterwards, from the late 1990s onwards, with feature films. So Radu, why did you select Z32 out of all the films that you have seen from Avi's filmography?
Oh, that's a complicated question, because as I said, I could have chosen others, but I thought that maybe, I mean, now I have to answer that. So maybe I think, because I chose it without thinking too much, I think it has two things important for the current moment, also in China and Hong Kong, for the current moment in Israel, because in May, we know what happened. So I think it's somehow more important for the current moment. And also, I think there's something interesting in it as well. Is this, well, maybe it's just a detail, but for me, it's very important, is the fact that all of a sudden, the device that Avi used there, when was the film done? 13 years ago or 14 years ago, I think. This digital mask, which created this kind of weird effect, like a Franjou film, and also had a very, how should I say, technique. It was done with because of a technical necessity, not to see the faces of not the characters, the persons, but also nowadays in the last 3 or 4 years, these digital masks became mainstream. I see it in my child TikTok account. Everybody's, you can create all these kind of things. So in a way, whenever I see somebody doing this digital mask on a Instagram account or a TikTok or whatever, I remember Avi's film, and I think he was in a way announcing this thing, which became, in his case, of course, a very strong political act. It became now an entertainment device.
So Avi, I mean, I don't know whether you've rewatched your films maybe often, but now that we are screening Z32, so what do you think of Radu's comment just now? Because he just said that the film, although it was made 13, 14 years ago, it has a very contemporary relevance today. So what do you think of the film now?
Hi, Clarence. Hi, Radu. Thank you, first of all, for this kind invitation. I must say that for me, it's a big honor, Radu, to be selected by you, or to have one of my films selected by you. I admire your work so much, and your friendship. So, well, thank you so much for this invitation. Now, you know, Clarence, that the technique we used to do Z32 at the time was really innovative. It's not that it wasn't that we invented it completely, but we had very little sources to learn from, and we had to the After Effects and animation masters that worked with me had to day by day really discover new ways of how to do it, and you know, in a way, in a strange way, if we would have sent our character to Argentina to do a face job, plastic surgery, and then brought him home for filming, and then sent him to replace the face job with his original face, it might have cost less than how much it cost us to do the digital work. So obviously, yes, the film still, I think, is still relevant, definitely in content, but also in form. And I hope that, well, normally I would hope that my singing would have made, would have changed present day culture. I'm not sure that this is the case, but this was maybe, for me, it was not only about the digital masks, but it was also about the singing filmmaker.
Actually, Avi, can you maybe we will take a step back, and can you tell us a little bit about the making of Z32? Because the theme of looking at the Israeli state and its policies towards Palestinians it's been an ongoing passion of yours in terms of the themes you touched in your films. So what was the origins of Z32 in terms of, well, the films that you made?
In terms of
all the films that you make? I mean, maybe, well, why did you make Z32 or zero in on this particular soldier?
Look, I've been involved in the activism against the Israeli occupation for many, many years, against the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories of the West Bank and Gaza Strip for many years. And also I'm one of the founders of this organization of veteran soldiers called Breaking the Silence. And both Z32 and also my latest film, The First 54 Years, an abbreviated manual for military occupation, are derived from testimonies collected by this organization, testimonies of soldiers. And in a strange way, both films were conceptualized in their very beginning as very simple films made of headshots like ours here, Radu and myself here, of people talking, people testifying about what they did during their service in the occupied territories. And somehow both films, found their way into being complicated. And that the idea of to make very simple films of just a testimony, a simple story, someone telling his own experience of the service have become quite complicated, and of course in very different ways. It's very When you look at Z32 and the first 54 years, it's very strange to think that they started actually from the very same starting point and ended up so differently. So I thought that, or I still think that telling stories of one's experience as part of as a tool of the oppression is an important thing to do, and this is what brought up both those films.
So Avi, I understand that you are really a conscientious objector. When you were young, you actually refused to serve in the army when you were sent to fight in Lebanon. So was that actually the origins of how you actually think of making the film or looking at Israeli occupation of the Palestine territories? Was it the starting point for your films?
Look, this not only for my films. I think that the turning point of my adult life, the point where I had to take a position. I don't know how to describe it, against the whole state. We are brought up here in Israel. We are highly indoctrinated how we have to serve the state, how the military service is a very important pillar of our existence, and how obviously the state is it's very difficult to describe oneself in Israel separate from the state. So when in 1983 I was called to go and serve in Lebanon during the first Lebanon War, and decided not to do it. I was already active in a Conscientious Objectors organization. I was actually at the time the spokesman of this organization. But the actual decision of saying, no, this is something that I will not do, even if I have to go to jail. And I did go to jail. It was not a terrible jail period. And the military jail in Israel is very mild. This has been, I think, since that moment on, my life has been very different. Not because of how reality reacted to my actions, but because of how I perceived reality.
But when did you first realize that, well, the one way of trying to change people's perception of reality is to actually represent reality on screen, or maybe in your own way through films?
No, the correct questions should be, when did you stop believing that changing people's perception of reality has to do with filmmaking? Because seriously, I was since I was very young and started making films, all of them with a political angle, I was naive enough to think that films can make a difference, that films change, that films can become agents in the political discourse. I'm not sure that I believe that anymore. At a certain point, after making so many films that have been quite successful internationally, but failed to reach Israeli audiences, or failed to move from the culture columns in the newspaper to the socio-political columns, I'm not naive anymore, and I'm not sure that film really matter.
Radu, what do you think of what Avi just said? I mean, for your context in Romania, do you share similar sentiments with Avi in terms of, well, the pessimism, shall I say?
Yeah, of course, when you make films which have a social or a political angle, the question appears even if you don't want to. Sometimes it can appear mocking, like some people, journalists and so on, asked me, because I made a film called Aferim, which shows, if you want, the roots of anti-Roma, anti-Gypsy racism in Romania from the period of slavery of the Gypsies. And people say, so did the racism disappear in Romania because you made Aferim? And of course not. But, you know, actually, two things I have to add here. One is the fact that there is a guy, one of the most beautiful books about films that I ever read is called The Material Ghost by Gilberto Perez, I don't know. And one of the things he says, it's really a thick book, very dense book, the only book that this historian of cinema wrote and critic. He says at some point that, okay, maybe films cannot change society, but at least, and art in general cannot change society, but at least can show us what is to change. That's one thing. The other one, which is maybe a little bit more subtle in a way, is the fact that I would be very afraid, and I think it's good that films cannot change very much, because then if Avi would make the film changing the society to this direction, and then an ultra-Orthodox
Schwarzenegger would have changed society
back
in an irreversible way, maybe.
So yes, exactly. So I think it's better that, but and of course the change, if it happens, it's very complicated laws. I mean, material conditions that change the things. More than thinking or art, that's for sure. But sometimes these are part of the change, sometimes on good side, sometimes on the wrong side. I don't know. If you saw, and what's funny about that is that all these things, you know, all these problem touched in the films of Avi or other filmmakers, I don't know, it's always, they need to be framed in the context, because if you see, and I said this to our common filmmaker friend Nadav Lapid, joking in France in a Q&A like that, because if you see his last film, Ahed's Knee, there's a list that the filmmaker should speak about in Q&A. And they say, well, okay, you don't have the right to speak about occupation, but you can speak about Holocaust as much as you want, you know. And I did films about Holocaust. I said to Nadav, maybe we should change countries. I go to Israel and make films about Holocaust, and you come to Romania and you can speak about occupation. Nobody's going to have any problem with you. No. So it's the same with Avi. You know.
Yes, you know, Radu, when one watches your film, like I did in the last few days, this conversation triggered me to binge your work, although, you know, most of the films I've seen the second or third time. It's very interesting how anti-Semitism, how racism appears almost in every film of your, in every of your films. And one says, what's wrong with you? Well, why are you so interested in anti-Semitism? Radu, and you know, before we got to know each other, I thought that you were also Jewish, and that you are this anti-Semitism is a part of the obsession that we have.
Yeah, but it's not, you know, this is also another thing I say. It's like Avi doesn't make films about Holocaust. If I would be Jewish myself, despite my name, maybe this is psychoanalytical here, my name is Jew in German. But if I would be Jew, I wouldn't make films about Holocaust because I don't like the position of the victim. I don't like to make films from the position of the victim. It's always a position, well, no problem with people who do that, but I don't like it. I don't like it. So in my case, the rage, if you want, or the preoccupation with racism and anti-Semitism is the fact that, contrary to what Avi says, that he was brought up in a context where, you know, the propaganda was in that direction. Well, actually not contrary, on the same thing, I think I lived my first teenage years in the communist dictatorship, which was a very heavy nationalistical dictatorship as well. And then after the revolution, I spent my teenage years, like many of my colleagues, believing that before the communism, it was the golden age of Romania. And when I was 17 or 18 years old, and I discovered by reading some books, because nobody around ever spoke about the mass killings of the Jews, about the mass killings of the Roma people, about the slavery of the Gypsies, these things really enraged me and remained something like so big. But when I was young, I never imagined that these topics would become important topics for my films, because I thought film should be something else. So I don't know. It was just later. Sometimes, you know, you need some time from some ideas to develop in your mind in order to become films. And yeah, so the obsession is there because if you start really looking around and if you start researching, because you cannot see things, I mean, especially related to the past or this connection between present and the past without research. But then when you start researching, you find it, you see it. And I can give one small example about that. You know, 3 years ago, we had a very shameful referendum against LGBT people, organized by the state and the church, etc., and supported by many intellectuals, artists, actors, filmmakers, etc. And all of a sudden, because I knew all the ideas from the fascist past of Romania, when you see people in the parliament speaking for this referendum, it was the same ideas, the same rhetoric, the same shameful nationalistic, and in this case, you just replace Jew or Roma with homosexual or lesbian, and you have the same ideas. So I think this is why these things appear in my films, because they are around. They didn't disappear. It's not a closed. I mean, anti-Semitism doesn't really exist because there are no Jews anymore. You know, it's maybe 3,000 people, and it still is existing like this. But the racism against Roma is every day. The Roma people are, you know, in the margins of the society, and they are kept there systematically. It's not even that people hate the Gypsies. You don't need to hate them. They are outside of the society.
It's interesting what you said about how until after the revolution, you believed or people believed that the communist time, the earlier communist time was a golden age, because also here in Israel, people of the center left tend to think that before '67, before the beginning of the occupation, life was fantastic, and we should wish to return. The whole idea of the two-state solution is about returning to the pre-'67 situation, which of course is undermining the Palestinian Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe of 1948. But Radu, I wanted to ask you one thing. I'm shifting from the political to the formal. In one of the items in the dictionary that you provide in bad luck banging or loony porn. By the way, we should stop making films with long titles. Z32 is a perfect title. The first 54 years, an abbreviated manual for military occupation is too long.
True.
But in one of the items in the dictionary that you provide in bed luck banging, you say something like that when you want to look at reality, you start writing fiction, which is something that I envy. I cannot write fiction. I all the time look at reality and I ask myself, how can I rewrite it in a way that will not make a documentary? I would like to make a fiction film. Maybe I believe that fiction has an easier way to the hearts of the public, of the viewers. But it's interesting that when you look at reality, you start fictionalizing.
Well, you know, it's as we know, the question of modernity and also cinema, but also the philosophy, etc., was this border which is shifting, which is more and more unclear between reality, documentary recording of reality, and fiction. And we all know already that, you know, when you look at an old films, and I like more to watch older films than contemporary cinema. And I think it's not because I'm a aesthetical conservative, but because all of a sudden, if you see a fiction film from the 30s and 40s or 50s, they are really like documentary. I just saw our friend, speaking of Israel, our friend Ariel Schweitzer gave me the films of Uri Zohar, which are fiction films, you know, but it's absolutely documentary there. It doesn't matter that there is a plot, there is characters, actor playing it. It becomes a documentary. And also, we all know documentaries, or we should say documentaries in quotes, which look like documentaries. I mean, like the documentary recording of reality, and they are total fake. They are fictions. They are either propaganda or I don't know. They are wrong. They got wrong the situation. There is one example of a Romanian documentary called Chuck Norris versus Communism, where the documentary maker praises a woman who translated VHS tapes secretly, but with the approval of Secret Service in the 80s for the local market. And apparently the documentary says that this woman, because showing the Romanians the benefits of the capitalist world, provoked the revolution, which is a total fake, but it was a review in New York Times saying exactly that. So you can see how a documentary is actually more fictionalized than a fiction film.
Yes, no, I agree with that. Look, one thing that sometimes people don't realize is how when you make a documentary, an honest documentary, not a fake documentary or a made-up reality, any way you go, you have to rewrite the story. You cannot take a chunk of history and put it on screen. You have to always retell it, and retelling is about how you see it, obviously. And you and me, we will look at the same snapshot of reality, we will see different things. There is no way both of us will see the same thing, or when we will retell, we will tell it in the same way, stylistically, and of course also the content. Each and every one of us, when we witness a situation, we go home and we tell it in a different way to our partners. So and the retelling obviously is crashing the details, or the crashing the snapshot that we had and recreating it, and in that sense it's fictionalizing again.
Yeah, and I think this is why your films are also important, because they always show the mechanism of the construction of the film. Because most of the films, fiction or documentary, try to hide that they
these are the biggest liars.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, when the filmmaker pretends to be a fly on the wall, then I start suspecting him.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, Avi, for your films, Z32, and also, well, for some of the audience here, they might have seen the first 54 years because it was shown here at the Hong Kong Asian Film Festival. Avi's film, you always put yourself bang right at the center or in the frame. You actually show your audience your struggle in tackling reality, or maybe to give the villains some closure. For example, in Z32, this soldier who killed people, should you actually allow him to have this confession on screen? And also for your other films as well, for example, your confrontation with Ariel Sharon, and also the other films that you showed as well. So is it because of your reluctance or reservations about objectivity that actually you go in the opposite direction? You put yourself, subjectivity, in the frame for everybody to see.
Well, in retrospect, maybe this could be described that so in the way you did, that I include myself and the process of making the film because of my objectivity to my objection to objectivity. But the truth is that this has evolved in in a way that was not preconceived. I just found myself, I realized while making each of those films, how the making of the film becomes brings up so many crucial and important issues that cannot be ignored, and that my how shall I say emotional and mental involvement is so crucial that I need to express it, that I cannot hide it from the viewers, and you know, I found different ways of expressing those dilemmas and those thoughts, and if you ask me now in retrospect, I can very easily say that the process of making the film is a lot of times more interesting than the film itself. Obviously, when you include the process within the film, then the film is not the film that you were going to do, but there's another layer, another story above the original structure. So as years went by, I could not conceive a film that is not asking itself the questions that it raises. It's you know, it has become it has become a nature, a second nature, a new second nature.
But tell me something, Avi, isn't it also, I was thinking, a kind of a Jewish inclination towards a certain type of humor and of role-playing, because Claude Lanzmann appears in his films in one way or another. Marcel Ophuls is always doing it in quite an interesting way. I really love Marcel Ophuls, the way he presents himself playing a part in his documentary film. So I was thinking it's also maybe a kind of a tradition into that.
Look, I'm not sure that this is a Jewish tradition, but because you know, when I look, for instance, at Arab cinema, films from Syria, from Palestine, from Lebanon, you a lot of time discover the same kind of introspection, and the need of filmmakers to tell a story that has made them involved in reality or in life in a way that they could not tell it, excluding their contemplation. So I'm not sure it's a Jewish thing, but and also, by the way, and also include a lot of humor in that, which is also something that you find in definitely in Palestinian cinema, in Syrian cinema. So I maybe it's a regional thing, but well, I think that it has to do a lot with people who are politically involved and see the absurdity and of the political reality, have to also include those dilemmas within the expression.
So Radu, how about you? I mean, your films, your feature films and your documentaries, they are quite different from Avi's. You never really put yourself into these films, apart from the odd on-screen appearance in I Do Not Care. If we go down in history as barbarians, of course, your voiceovers, but you are also very present with your own representation of history. So how do you do it? I mean, what's your view of actually breaking this fourth wall, maybe, in order to?
Yes, it's a good question, because I think it appeared from necessity, in a way. Not from the desire to be more sophisticated, let's say, or more complicated, but, and it also became a little bit second nature for me. It came from necessity, because when I did my first films dealing with history, which is Aferim, all of a sudden the questions that you have to solve are different from a contemporary film. And if you really think about the representation of history, such a distant history, like 200 years ago, became completely, really a ridiculous game to do it realistically. I mean, when I saw the first test of the actors with the costumes, with these Ottoman style costumes, it was absolutely funny and ridiculous. You felt it's ridiculous to film that and to pretend that that's the reality of 200 years ago. You know, it was absolutely. So I tried to find, first of all, unconsciously, a way to create the distance, to show somehow that the film is a reconstruction, and to include elements of this reconstruction to be seen. So I chose, I don't know, black and white image, like a bit of a Western tropes, which of course are not Romania. Romania doesn't have a Western genre; it's an American genre. And also the language, which of course doesn't go into translation. It's spoken in the very literary language of the 19th century, because that's the only documents I can have from that time. I mean, written text. So I made all the dialogues from these quotations. And then the idea stayed. I mean, for each film dealing with history, but also the ones dealing with contemporary time, like the last one, Bad Luck Banging, you cannot go back in a way. And I'm not speaking from a quality point of view, but you cannot go back. It's like, you know, I'm a big fan of James Joyce, and I like enormously his first the stories, the Dubliners, the short stories. And then I read some years. I thought, why didn't Joyce, got back to write some more short stories like the Dubliners, which are beautiful in their own way? But you feel that after somebody wrote Ulysses, like he did for, I don't know, 10 years, you cannot go back after you challenge the language in such a way. It would be impossible to go back. So I feel a little bit the same, not to compare myself with Joyce, of course, but in the moment when you start to construct a film or to see it not only as a story, let's tell a story with images, but when you have these problems of the representation process, be it about history or about present times, you just cannot go back to say, oh, now I'm going just to do a reportage or a simple film like that or a simple story. I feel I cannot. I would like to, but it's impossible. It became impossible. I don't know how it is for Avi, but I'm sure it's the same.
No, I definitely agree. And there's one moment that from bad luck banging, that for me is actually I don't know, twisting the film from a normal fiction film to a very conscientious, full of conscience film. And this is when Amy walks in the market somewhere. Suddenly there's an older woman looking at the camera and saying something nasty about her. And of course, in a fiction film, it's impossible, but because in a fiction film, the participants in the scene don't see the camera. There is no camera for them. It's in a documentary, of course, the camera is present, and many filmmakers are very sorry that they cannot hide the camera, but the camera is present, and sometimes people react to it. But in a fiction film, it cannot happen.
But you know, this is sorry to interrupt. This is my main objection against a filmmaker who's actually a friend. I know him, Alexander Nanau. He makes documentary films, and never, not even for a second, a character looks at the camera, only if it's an interview or something. But other than that, no. So I tell him, why the hell? Why do you tell the people not to look at the camera? I said, well, you know, I don't want the viewer to get back from the film. I want them to be immersed in that.
Yeah. Well, it's a question. Well, there are two questions. One question is what is more effective, of course, but the other question is a question of language. For me, looking at the camera and saying there is a camera here is maybe the first step of making cinema. Don't forget for 1 second that there is a camera here. It's such an important gesture, thought, or mention that we should not ever forget.
I agree. And actually, when you ask what is more effective, but I think there are different ways to be effective. And in a way, you don't want to be effective. It's like in love. I mean, you can lie to a person and be effective, but I think it's more important to be honest and somehow keep not to try to fool the other one. That's maybe not so effective, but on the long run, I think it's more a better quality of the relation. So this is what I always say about that.
So we've been talking about how you see as the most effective way of engaging audiences towards your films. So maybe I'll just ask the both of you, Radu and Avi, about audiences and their reactions to your films, because as we mentioned earlier, most of your films, they actually are very much against the mainstream consensus of what history should be, of what a country should be, or what patriotism should be. But can you tell us a little bit about how your films were received in your home countries, in Romania and in Israel?
Is Bad Luck Banging distributed in cinemas in Romania?
Yes, it was, and it was pirated immediately after the release. But even that, it was quite a popular film.
It was in an uncensored version?
Yes, but 18 years, it was the limit of 18 years old.
Yeah. No, I wondered when I watched it again yesterday, I asked myself how it will be perceived here. Obviously, it's a foreign film, so maybe, or how it would have been perceived had it been an Israeli film. Because Israel, after all, it likes to pretend to be a very liberal place, but it's actually a very conservative place. Look, Lawrence, my experience is, I think, a very sad experience, because sometimes you ask, how was the film accepted? I don't know. It was ignored. Most of my films are ignored. I know that within the cinema community, my films are highly appreciated. But I don't make my films for a few connoisseurs and discuss it in cafes, smoking cigarettes and drinking espresso. You want to, when you make a film, you in your mind, you reach an audience and somehow you get some feedback. But when there's no feedback, when your films are ignored, this is, I think, even worse than being trashed.
So, but how was there any massive backlash from the conservative press, for example, or maybe even the state, about what the things you said in your films?
No, this is the thing. Look, the only backlash I can report on is that the most recent film, the first 54 years, was not supported by any of the cinema foundations that normally supported my films. None of the TV broadcasters agreed to broadcast the film, and even all of the festivals, the Israeli film festivals, has rejected it. So maybe this is the most overt feedback I ever received for my films. It's like a lot of people, because if you think about it, there are a lot of lectors deciding all those decisions of to support the film or to exhibit. They were all saying, don't do it, don't do it.
So how about you, Radu? I mean, how we talked about Bad Luck Banging, but throughout your career, for your films, because you've been quite critical of what the masses think or what the masses do. So how did the masses actually react to your films then?
Well, I object to that, because I don't think I ever made a generalizing film like that, to say the masses do that or do the other thing, or only on towards specific problems and to specific persons. And I say that because this is one of the generalization against me, where people say he wants to say that all Romanians are killers or mass murderers or something like that. And I said, no, I never do that. Well, actually, maybe in Israel probably it's like that. Like Avi says, I think there's two things to say here. One is the fact that maybe Romania, because it's still in a way a young country, a young democracy. It's only 30 years old after the fall of communist dictatorship, and things are really, really still in a movement. It's not so settled. It's a country which is very chaotic from many points of view, contrary to Israel, which, because I mean, we saw it in the vaccination campaign, everything was organized. I mean, Romania is completely chaotic. And sometimes this chaos can help a little bit. that's the other side of the coin, because being like that, sometimes things can get through, like the fact that despite many people complained about that, because, for instance, the way the films are proposed to the Oscars for the foreign language Oscar proposals, it was a committee of critics and 3 of them were younger, so they chosen my film, and all of a sudden it was the Romanian official choice for the Oscars, bad luck banging. And these kinds of things still happen because I think, as I said, there are islands of freedom, or islands or the politics do not control everything. Otherwise, because of that, because of this young democracies that we are still, and maybe that's also not a genetic thing, but something regarding the civilization in the Balkan area, the reactions are much more violent sometimes. So towards my films, there were really, really violent reactions in part of the press, sometimes politicians or people from Romanian academia condemned the film or asked it to be banned. Some films, received a lot of threats, these kind of things, which, well, in the end, I think it makes me very pleased, because I like to be attacked. I think it's part of the pleasure of making this kind of cinema. And one more thing, because I also made documentaries, meaning like documentaries with archive materials mostly. And I think this is why what happens to Avi also is that people react much more with much more indifference towards documentaries than towards fiction films or films with actors. I don't know. I have a problem to say, I do not care if we go down in history as barbarians is a fiction film, because the center of it, the massacre in Odessa by the Romanian army in 1941, is a real event. But all of a sudden, when it's a film with a story, with actors, like what we normally call the fiction film, the reaction is much more violent than towards a documentary. It's like people are used that documentaries can attack these kind of topics, but a fiction film is something that makes people much more angry. I don't know why exactly.
Okay, so Radu, Avi, maybe I'm sure the audience, after hearing what you said about your work, they probably would have some questions to ask you. So maybe we should now open it up to the floor to see whether there are any questions from the audience. If any of you would like to ask questions, please raise your hand, please. The gentleman.
Hello. 2 questions. The first is, the first one is backside story. The second one is pitching. The first story, why choose the format in the form of backside story in the whole film? And the second question, is like pitching with in the form of chanting with musical ensemble. I wonder, is it is effective in pitching? Like it is it noise, or is it voice in the form of pitching? Do you understand my question?
I'm not sure. The connection is a little bad. Clarence, could you repeat the questions?
Okay, the first one.
如果你想可以亦都可以用中文問我哋，亦都可以翻譯做英文。
I can do it in English.
Okay.
The first question: why choose the format in the form of backside story? The 2 characters, the couples, are doing a presentation in the form of like telling a backside story.
A backside story? I'm not sure I understand.
They're acting on a bed.
On the bed.
On the bed.
The young couple, they are discussing their experience on.
Yeah, why in the format like this?
This was not my choice. It was their choice. I was not there when they were filming themselves. You look at a certain point during the interviews I did with the protagonist, with the main protagonist, he expressed his discontent with the way he expressed himself during the interviews. So I thought, because he felt that, this situation where there was a camera and 3 people behind the camera was distracting him or something. So I told him, take the camera and film, do your own interview alone at home. And he did that, but he also started to film his dialogues with his girlfriend. And of course, when I saw the first run of those conversations, I told him, look, I don't want to say anything because I can only ruin something very strong that you have. I don't want to interfere, to suggest, to intervene. I don't want to tell you what to do. Go, continue and do whatever you like. So all those situations were out of my, luckily, out of my control.
Thank you. Second question. It seems like the singing or chanting with musical ensemble, there is a musical performance. You are in the center of the people. You are singing or chanting. I wonder, is this voice or noise? How effective is this kind of pitching? Do you agree this is pitching?
How did I what?
To present,
pitching,
to present the, or to sermonize, to actually convey the message or convey the.
It seems like a religious presentation.
Like
pitching.
A Greek chorus, like a Greek chorus, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
I think the question was, Avi, he'd like to know whether you think this is the most effective way of providing a narration or maybe a Greek chorus kind of thing for the whole story.
Sometimes I think it is a voice. Sometimes I think it's a noise. How effective it is.
Thank you for thinking my singing is a noise. I like noise music very much. Look,
no Peking opera, no Beijing opera for Avi.
Yeah. The idea to start singing or to sing in this film, to sing what I call the documentarist blues in this film, I must tell you, it was a very intuitive idea. It's not as if I preconceived or let's say that I understood the Brechtian position that I have taken only in retrospect. It was clear that I needed to address the ethical dilemmas that the film, the making of this film raised, and I needed to decide on how to do it because I've already in the past I have spoken to the camera. I have played different roles in front of the camera, like Radu mentioned earlier, and obviously when you make films, you don't like to repeat the same trick again, so I was looking for a way to express my position or my dilemmas in the film, and then I remembered how before we started making the film, in the very months before, there was a moment where I suggested to Noam Inbar, the musician who eventually wrote the music to the film, I suggested for him to do an opera. do an opera. Because I thought that this character, Z32, was a tragic character, you know, a person who realizes in the middle of his life that he has done something horrible in the past when he was younger, and that could not be corrected, something that is irreversible. He killed the person. And I think this is, and he has to live with it for the rest of his life. So I think this is you know, a tragic character of a tragedy. And so I wanted to make an opera, and I guess, now, obviously we didn't make an opera, but maybe eventually you can say it's an operetta. So this was maybe the remains of that earlier thought. But I look, when I suggested to Noam Inbar to write songs for me to sing, it was not even clear if I could sing. So it's all a more intuitive decision of going somewhere and praying to God that it will work out.
The singing, the lyrics, it started out as describing the predicaments of Z32, this ex-soldier. But as the film goes on, it takes on this this level, this angle of the filmmaker, the singer's own moral dilemmas. So how did that actually change in terms of, well, the subjectivity or the angle of the lyrics?
No, the idea of the songs were always they're always meant to express the position of the filmmaker in front of the reality that he has created. Yes, of course, he didn't create the situation of the assassination, but of the Palestinian policeman, but he has created this impossible reality of providing shelter to the assassin. So the songs were always intended to deal with those issues. It's true that in the beginning, the songs talk about the soldier, but of course it's from the point of view of the filmmaker, of how he perceived the story and the situation created in front of the camera.
Okay, so maybe we'll see whether there are any other questions from the audience. Any other questions for Radu and Avi? Okay, hold on.
我想問咧，就係問 Radu 嘅，因為頭先佢都講過佢自己有仔女啦，咁所以我想問，其實即係羅馬尼亞嘅教育係點樣去教翻即係佢羅馬尼亞歷史有啲比較黑暗嘅一面，即係譬如大屠殺嗰啲㗎。
Okay, Radu, this is a question for you. Our friend in the audience, she said, well, she understood that you have your own kids. So how do schools, or how does the Romanian educational system tell the children what to think about history? I mean, in terms, for example, the Holocaust, how was history actually taught in schools?
Oh, not much changed after 1989, to be honest. As I said, not only the communist dictatorship was very nationalistical, but I think that for a country like Romania, which is at the periphery of Europe in one way or another, close to Russia, close to Ottoman Empire in the history, etc. It was always our identity as a community, as a nation, is shaped by history, much more probably than other countries. So this is why history is such an important thing for Romanians, because and people feel like if you attack the myth of this beautiful history that we had, always heroic fights against enemies, defending Europe. It's like a common thing to say that if Romania is poor, is because we didn't develop, because we fought to stop Ottoman Empire from getting to Europe, so they had time to develop economically and culturally while we fought for them, etc. So all these kind of things are very powerful in the society, because, as I said, it's not only about the past, but it's about our identity. And of course, I want to question that, because there is a definition, actually. At some point, there is a famous, I forgot the name, a psychiatrist, and he said, what does it mean to be healthy from a psychic point of view, mentally healthy? He said the first thing is to know where you are coming from, and when you are going. If you know these three answers, then maybe you're not crazy. And I think it's true about societies as well. I mean, I think a society has to know, a community has to know how it is at the moment, how it was in the past, and what are the values and what do they want in the future. So this is why I believe that lucidity towards history is important. Now, yes, actually, I regard it in the school textbook of my kid. The bigger one is 17 years old, and it's really funny to say that about the Holocaust is 3 lines, which I read them over and over again, because at the beginning they seem, well, questionable, but okay, but in the end they seem horrifying. It says like that Marshal Antonescu's regime had to implement measures taken by Adolf Hitler. Many Jews, thousands of Jews were deported to Transnistria, and unfortunately, many have died. This is what it says in the book. And well, what does it mean have died? It means like they have died because of old age or sickness, but no, they were killed. It doesn't say that, the book, and they said many. What does it mean many? Because many can be 5 or 6 or 7, or as it was the case, more than 300,000 people were killed. So you can see there is something, but what it is in a way, like in documentaries that we spoke before, it's a documentary information, but meant actually to hide more than to reveal, you know.
But Avi, how about you? I mean, how about the situation in Israel for the school children in Israel? How was history taught? For example, of course, the creation of the state of Israel in 1948, but of course, the other side of the coin would be the Nakba, the Palestinians' loss of territory. But this wasn't really taught in Israeli historical textbooks. So how did actually school children perceive what the real history was like?
Well, obviously, in our history books, the Holocaust take more than 3 lines, or 3 lifetimes to tell. Our culture is cultivating the telling of the Holocaust for many years, and has created so many ways of one must say indoctrination of us as the products of the Holocaust, which I'm not saying is completely untrue, but it's done in a very exaggerated way. And on the other hand, obviously, the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe of 1948, is well, you can't say that it's not mentioned, but it's mentioned. The angle of telling the story of 1948, obviously, is again the Zionist angle of a young and weak country that is trying to become independent and is fighting for its life, and of course the catastrophic effect that it had on the Palestinian people. The fact that, you know, first of all, the war crimes or the expulsions, the massacres are hardly mentioned. But also one thing that, if you think about it, you know, when during wars, crimes are committed. A war is a big crime in itself. Crimes are committed. But when you imagine that once a war is over, then some corrections can be made. For instance, if people fled or were deported during the war, that they would be allowed to return to their homes, which is what the laws, the international law says. But if you ask me, the biggest crime of Israel is not allowing the Palestinians who fled Palestine during the 1948 war to return to their homes. This is a bigger crime than the crimes committed during the fighting. And obviously, those crimes are hardly mentioned in the textbooks and or not mentioned at all, and every time denied. And when someone tries to introduce a new textbook for the education system, it becomes a threat to the narrative, to our the existence, one can say.
Okay, maybe we'll have time for one more question. Any question for Radu and Avi? Okay, okay, this gentleman here.
幫我翻譯啦。OK， 我就係想個感想，因為即係最讚歎就係喺個影像上咧，係開頭係一個帶咗一個恐怖分子嗰啲咁嘅頭笠咁啦，後尾就慢慢去改良嗰個影像咧，係一個似面嘅樣，跟住到一個係我唔見到食煙咧，都唔知原來佢嗰個係假面嚟嘅。即係我覺得呢一個我一個聯想到啲嘅歷史一啲嘅化妝啊，或者即係假扮咧，係你原來係冇啲咩蛛絲馬跡嘅話咧，就可能慢慢俾佢完善咗嘅呢個假象啊。OK， 但係多謝你俾到呢個啟示咯。OK。
Okay, our friend in the audience would just like to say thank you for the very impressive way of representing or experimenting with how to conceal the identity of Z32, Avi, because he said that, well, originally it was about wearing the balaclavas, but then again, afterwards, it's a continuous experimentation of the digital face, and finally, it looks perfect. You couldn't really tell that is a computerized image. And our friend in the audience would just like to say thank you for this technique.
Thank you very much. Look. What I'm really happy about the end result of the digital work, well, it was a combination of animation and After Effects work, was that it is almost perfect. It is not perfect. And that there are moments where the 3D mask does not perfectly fit, or when, for instance, our character, the main character, smokes, that suddenly his hand and cigarette go under the mask and turn it from a 3D mask into a 2D mask. Suddenly it becomes flat, and of course the illusion is ruined, and for me these are the most powerful moments. But yes, the main question was how can you do it in a way that will allow us to look into his soul, because when you blur a person's face or when you totally darken it, then you have no access to his expressions or to his soul. So this was I'm very happy with this solution. Thank you for your kind words.
Okay, and I think probably, well, we are about time to wrap things up. So, but thank you so much, Radu and Avi, for joining us for this conversation here in Hong Kong at the Broadway Cinematheque. Thank you so much. Shall we extend a round of applause for our guest speakers, Radu Jude and Avi Mograbi? Thank you so much.
Thank you,
and
Clarence.
Don't forget that Avi's films can be easily found on YouTube. You still have YouTube in Hong Kong, so use it.
Yes, we do, Radu. Exactly. I mean, as Radu said, Avi has generously made most of his films. Is it most of your films, Avi? Or
all of my films, but the last one.
Okay, so all of his films, apart from the most recent one, is on Avi's YouTube channel. So if hopefully, well, by seeing Z32, you'll be interested in watching more of Avi's work if you haven't seen them already. And of course, Radu's films, they will all be shown here at the Broadway Cinematheque in our retrospective of his work. Thank you so much, Radu and Avi. And then we'll see you later, hopefully with your next films.
Thank you, Clarence and Radu, for the invitation, for the opportunity to show the film and to speak to your audience. And Radu, I look forward to our next meeting.
I would love to. As soon as possible, Avi. Thank you so much for accepting the conversation. And
thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye to everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.